Good morning. Today is Thursday, July 17th, 2025. I want to mention two separate topics. They're not connected. The first is something that I have spoken about before and will continue to do so. There is a public letter that has been published, and the title of the letter is Jewish Leaders and Community Members Condemn Settler Violence in Israel. And I am one of hundreds of rabbis, educators, and community leaders who have signed this letter, and I'll just read part of it to you. On Friday, this past Friday, Jewish settlers in Israel, violently attacked the West Bank village of Sinjil, killing 2 Palestinians and wounding 10. The news has reported that one of the victims, 21-year-old Saif Musalat, happens to be a U.S. citizen, was beaten to death. Paramedics were prevented from reaching him, and he died before arriving at the hospital. Second victim was a 23-year-old, Mohammed al-Shalabi, who died of his wounds after being shot in the back. Al-Shalabi was left bleeding for hours before medics could reach him, a delay that contributed to his death. In recent weeks, there has been an alarming increase in settler violence against civilian, non-violent Palestinians, including the burning of inhabited homes and expulsion of men, women, and children from their land. Some of the perpetrators believe they are fulfilling God's commandment to conquer the land. We, the below signed, including rabbis, educators, and Jewish community members, declare that these actions are contrary to the morality of the Torah. We call on all spiritual and communal leaders to denounce these actions and not remain silent in their presence. And I will just add on my own, I also call on the government, the military, and the police to take action. It is our Jewish and moral obligation to speak out against these actions and to protect innocent people. The phenomenon of Jewish terrorists is something that should be abhorrent to every one of us. And there needs to be a loud voice, a moral voice, and a legal voice that does not allow that to continue. On a completely different topic, I have an incredible story to tell you. So I heard this a couple of days ago on a radio program that I enjoy very much. It's called Fresh Air. Terry Gross is the host, and she interviews people, and she interviewed a man named Calvin Duncan. If you have a chance to listen to the entire program, it's very worthwhile. I want to share just a part of it that has a message that, again, I think is incredible. Calvin Duncan served 28 and a half years in prison for a murder robbery he did not commit. He spent his time in prison in the prison law library and learned enough to help free other wrongfully convicted men, and eventually, after 28 and a half years, won his own freedom. He served most of his time in the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. You may remember I told you a story about my personal interaction with the prison in Angola. That's where he became an official jailhouse lawyer as part of Angola's inmate counsel substitute program. Duncan worked on hundreds of cases and helped free many people incarcerated there. And it took years of trying to get his own case reopened, often coming close, but then encountering another obstacle. But he finally succeeded. He was released on an exchange for a plea deal, and later he was exonerated. Now, after he was released in 2011, he went to college and got his BA from Tulane in New Orleans. And this past spring, at the age of 60, he received his law degree from the Lewis and Clark University of Oregon. He lives in New Orleans. He's the founder and director of the Light of Justice program, which works to improve access to the courts for people who are incarcerated. Now listen to this. So what does it mean that while he was in Angola prison, he was a jailhouse lawyer? What is a jailhouse lawyer? So Duncan explained, in places like Louisiana, once a person is convicted of a crime and there's an appeal and the appeal is upheld, that person, that prisoner, is no longer entitled to a lawyer. Listen to that one more time. They're no longer entitled to a lawyer. If they can afford one, they can hire a lawyer, but of course, many people in this situation cannot. So without a lawyer, you can't ever hope to have your case reviewed or new evidence introduced. And so there are people who are in prison who become jailhouse lawyers, meaning they are counsel substitute. They're not real lawyers, but they provide legal assistance to these people who cannot afford an attorney. And Duncan recalls the time that he learned this early in his imprisonment. He says it was a very painful statement for the lawyer to tell me. His lawyer, who was actually part of the organization whose function is legal aid, to provide legal help for people who are indigent, this lawyer said to him, the state of Louisiana does not view you as a person, and therefore you are not entitled to a lawyer. Can you imagine that? He's not a person for legal purposes, and therefore not entitled to a lawyer. Okay. I want to go to a different part of this story. Because Calvin Duncan was instrumental in getting a Supreme Court decision of the United States Supreme Court. Now listen to this. I never knew this. In Louisiana, state of Louisiana, up until 1991, you did not need a unanimous jury to convict someone of a criminal case. Normally, in almost every state in the United States, and in most places, to convict someone of a criminal charge, the jury has to be unanimous. But in Louisiana, all you needed was 10 out of 12. You could have 12 jurors, but only 10 had to vote. 2 could say the person is innocent, but the person would still be found guilty. Why does Louisiana have such a law? So this is absolutely incredible. This law, called the non-unanimous law, was passed in 1898. In 1898, the Supreme Court ruled that juries could not exclude blacks from juries, that courts could not exclude blacks from juries. So Louisiana, which did not want blacks on any juries, found a legal way to do it. And the chair of the Judiciary Committee wrote, quote, "To establish the supremacy of the white race in this state to the extent to which it could be legal and constitutionally done." So they made a rule that you only had to have 10 out of 12, which meant you could have one or two black people on the jury. They could vote to acquit this person, and you could ignore them. So there are black people on the jury, but they have no say. Now, when Duncan was in prison, he learned about this. And there were a number of other people, not him, but there were a number of other people who were convicted with these kinds of cases, where the jury was 10-2 or 11-1. That means that one or two people on the jury found this person innocent, but the court ruled that they were guilty. And when he found out that the basis of this rule was in order explicitly to exclude blacks from juries, he, with the help of a lawyer, took this to the Supreme Court. And they said to the Supreme Court, you know, you allowed state of Louisiana and also the state of Oregon has the same rule, a non-unanimous jury. But did you know that the explicit reason for the non-unanimous jury was to exclude blacks? Now listen to this. It violates the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. It violates the 14th Amendment. It's clearly unconstitutional. But over a long period of time, the court constantly would reject our petition. So time after time, he presented this case, and the Supreme Court refused to hear it. On the 23rd petition, the United States Supreme Court said, we're going to hear the issue. And in 2020, the United States Supreme Court agreed with us that Louisiana law was unconstitutional because it violates the Sixth Amendment right to a jury verdict. So this man, who himself was incarcerated for over 28 years for a crime he did not commit, and who is spending his time helping other people in prison, and he finds out about this grossly unfair and unconstitutional situation that affects other people in the prison, and he works and tries 23 times to get a court to listen to it, and he does not give up. And the 23rd time he is successful. Now listen to this. This is Terry Gross. I think it's remarkable that you're responsible for initiating that case. After the 23rd petition, it finally got to the Supreme Court, and that law was overturned. You have such persistence, and you've had such persistence in the face of such odds. Like when you were in prison, you worked for years and years to get your case reopened and have a meaningful appeal, and there kept being roadblocks. And even when things looked really good, something ended up standing in your way, even if it was the last minute. And you kept persisting. Where did that come from, that persistence? So this is why I wanted to share this with you. Please listen to Calvin Duncan's answer. What I firmly believe is that we are all entitled to hope. And how you make sure to keep hope and make sure other people maintain hope is to provide. Like I said earlier, Louisiana, we don't have a right to a lawyer. And so you have all these people convicted by non-unanimous jury verdicts. And we know that the conviction is unconstitutional. And so I believe that once we know that an injustice has occurred, I think it's the obligation of every person to keep on educating people, telling people, look, this law is creating harm. This law is unjust. And despite the fact that you might have one or two people that totally disagree with you, or might have 100 people that disagree with you, I believe that at some point, God is going to intervene and perk their hearts and minds and say, look, let's at least consider the issue. And so my persistence comes in just believing that if you give people an opportunity to do the right thing, that they will do it. Sometimes it takes a long time for that to happen. But history has shown that it actually happens. And you just can't give up in spite of being told no, 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 especially when you know you're right. I think that's an incredible lesson for all of us to keep in mind. And I wish well to Calvin Duncan. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.